You would not last a day because the work cycles arrive faster than your body recovers, and each cycle is safety critical. At Race Point on Cape Cod in 1888, the new whistle station kept a cistern of 5,600 gallons, about 21,000 litres, ready for steam. The keeper moved in short loops between tank, coal pile, lamp room and watch room. 15 minutes of rising fog forced a run to the signal. 30 minutes later, the lamp demanded tending. Rest windows compressed to near zero and small delays cascaded. This story breaks down 4 zones that fail first: fuel and water, light and optics, fog and sound, and weather and temperature. The United States Lighthouse Board, created in 1852, set strict routines, and its instructions of 1871 and 1881 defined lamp care, record keeping, and watch schedules. Kerosene replaced lard oil because cost mattered. In 1889, kerosene averaged about 8.5 cents per gallon, while lard oil cost about 57 cents. A Cape Cod tower meant vertical work. 2 5-gallon cans, about 38 litres total, climbed 20 to 40 meters, 65 to 130 feet, more than once per day. Now an electric optic turns itself. Then a clockwork needed winding every 4 hours, and brass and glass needed daily cleaning. Local conditions sharpened every limit. New England seas threw nor'easters that iced galleries and doors, while summer brought long fogs that stretched signaling into the night. Before wireless, messages left by flag, horn, or boat and could take hours. The first United States ship-to-shore wireless message came on 23 August 1899 from Lightship No. 70, and on 12 August 1901, the Nantucket Lightship talked with the Sconset station on Nantucket. After a 1903 patent, the diaphone began to replace older horns, but it drank air and attention. In 1910, the system shifted to the lighthouse service, yet logistics still moved by launch and wagon, and isolation still ran 30 to 60 days between shore trips. Instead of backup crews, most stations ran lean, so fatigue rose while margins fell. Fuel and water set the first limits because light and sound never pause on Cape Cod. At Race Point in 1888, the new whistle plant sat beside a cistern of 5,600 gallons, about 21,000 litres, reserved for steam. A winter night stretched 14 hours, and a first-order burner might consume 2 to 4 gallons of kerosene, 8 to 15 litres depending on wind. The action was simple repetition. Top the lamp, feed the firebox, and check the gauge. The risk was overlap, when fog built within 15 minutes and both systems demanded hands. Every refill starts on the ground with 2 cans of 5 gallons each, about 38 litres total. The keeper lifts 1 can to the shoulder and climbs 20 to 40 meters, 65 to 130 feet, in the spiral, pausing at landings for a 10 count to keep the pour steady. On Cape Lookout to the south, the same chore fixes into muscle as 216 steps, taken twice each night with 2 5-gallon cans in 2 trips and 1 minute of breath at each platform. A misstep near the watchroom spills a cup, about 200 milliliters, onto warm iron. The outcome is a sharp smell and a film that darkens the flame within an hour. The consequence is extra wiping at dawn while the next lift waits. Oil lived in a separate house by board rule after 1871, usually 15 to 50 meters from the tower. The keeper crossed sand with cans while wind drifted grains into the threads of each cap. Kerosene had replaced lard oil because money and cold mattered. By 1889, kerosene averaged 8.5 cents per gallon, while lard oil cost about 57. The action was slow walking to avoid slosh. The risk was a loose cap that wet a glove at the filler. The outcome was a flare and soot that stole time from sleep. Water decided how long a whistle could speak in June fog or January sea smoke. A station cistern held 3,500 to 5,600 gallons, 13 to 21,000 litres, filled by rain-off roofs into brick vaults. When visibility fell under 200 meters, the keeper primed a pump, opened the injector, and raised steam for a 6-second blast every 90 seconds. A low head in the tank let air enter the feed and the injector chattered. Tone dropped in 10 minutes. The consequence was heavier firing and faster water drawdown. Dry spells forced trade-offs the books did not ease. 30 days without real rain in July cut the stick in the cistern by 5 centimeters daily. The household ledger set 8 to 10 liters per person, and the boiler wanted more than that each hour in a long fog. The action was to throttle the signal in a marginal haze and save water for a true whiteout. The risk was a quiet interval during a fishing rush at dawn. The outcome was a stern log note and stricter rationing until the next squall. Fire lay in the work itself, so procedure mattered more than speed. Cotton waste stayed in a covered can, and wicks sat at fixed heights set by the 1881 instructions. The keeper vented cans for 1 minute before a pour to bleed heat. He trimmed a flat wick by 1 millimeter and watched the blue edge form under the mantle. The risk was fatigue after 12 hours awake that lifted the flame too high. The outcome was a hot chimney and a crack that darkened the room for 90 seconds. The consequence was another refill and a report. The cycle closed every 12 to 24 hours, so weight and stairs rewired the night. A single can weighed about 18 kilograms, and 2 lifts per night meant 70 to 160 meters of vertical work, depending on tower height. Refills happened near midnight and again before 4 in the morning. Hands shook on cold iron rungs, and breath shortened by the third ascent if the whistle boiled too. The outcome was slower trimming at the lens and a small sag in brightness before dawn. The consequence pushed the problem into optics, where scratches and soot penalized every delay. A lens defines the job before the weather even speaks. A first-order Fresnel stands about 2.54 meters high and weighs near 1.5 tons, set in a lantern that rises 20 to 30 meters above the sand, about 65 to 100 feet. The action at dawn is to open the service door, lay cotton on brass, and check for soot lines that grew in 8 to 14 hours of burn. The risk is a grit mote dragged across one prism in 5 seconds. The outcome is scatter. The consequence is a measurable loss of range that shows up on the next clear night. A third-order optic at a minor cape or island light looks modest at roughly 1 meter tall and a few hundred kilograms, but it still sets a clock for hands. The action is to match flame to aperture, smaller than a first order yet still bright at 5 to 9 nautical miles, 9 to 16 kilometers in dry air. The risk is treating it as forgiving when wind shifts 10 meters per second through a gallery leak. The outcome is a flutter that bends time marks. The consequence is a misread bearing by a coaster working past Chatham Bar. Cleaning eats the middle of the day. The keeper wipes brass frames and glass with alcohol and whiting for 60 to 90 minutes, then polishes rails by section until the lint stops catching. The lantern glazing often runs to a dozen panes, each 2 to 3 feet wide, framed in ribs that trap salt. The action is steady circles with a soft cloth, prism by prism. The risk is rushing after 12 sleepless hours. The outcome is a faint film that bakes hard in one more night. The consequence is double work tomorrow and a tighter evening schedule. Clockwork rules the flash unless attention lapses. The drive weight drops in measured feet and stops if the wind comes late. The action is winding every 3 to 4 hours, 50 to 80 turns, to lift 30 to 50 kilograms of weight back to the head. The risk is a fog whistle that demands hands at the same minute. The outcome is a stalled rotation and an odd azimuth that falses a sector. The consequence is an immediate restart and a log entry under the 1881 instructions with a note of time to the nearest minute. Characteristics separate towers that share a horizon. One case repeats in logs, a fixed white beam with a short flash, Every 10 to 20 seconds sits near a minor fixed red used to mark a bar. The action at sunset is to place the red screen on the correct pane and confirm the shutter that makes the flash. The risk is a hurried swap in a cold wind that hits 8 to 12 meters per second. The outcome is a displaced red by one pane. The consequence is a pilot steering to the wrong side of a shoal until the mistake is caught at the first flash cycle. Salt and cold attack optics faster than hands can answer in a squall. At 0 to 2 Celsius inside the lantern, breath fogs a prism in under 30 seconds, and spray blown at 15 meters per second etches spots that no dry cloth lifts. The action is to warm the glass with a lamp shield for 3 to 5 minutes and then wipe. The risk is a drop falling to the burner at relight. The outcome is a 3-second dip and soot. The consequence is a 1 to 2 mile loss of effective range until a full clean in calmer air. Stocks look small until a night runs long. 2 to 4 spare chimneys, a drawer of wicks cut to widths of 2 to 5 centimeters, and one red screen per designated sector fill a cabinet no larger than a suitcase. The action is to check counts each Sunday and to swap a chimney in under 1 minute if a crack shows. The risk is a slip that chips a lip on iron after 20 hours awake. The outcome is a short burn with a whine of air. The consequence is a dim period that pushes mariners to listen for the whistle, which shifts load toward the fog plant next. Fog is a schedule more than a scene on New England lights. When visibility falls under 200 meters, the keeper leaves the lamp and goes to sound. Board tables in this era call for a 6-second blast every 90 seconds during thick weather. The action is firing a small boiler, opening an injector, and watching the glass rise. The risk is damp coal and a sluggish draft when onshore wind sits near 8 meters per second. The outcome is a late first note. The consequence is a logged gap measured to the minute and a tighter watch for the rest of the day. The double trumpet, widely used along the Atlantic between 1869 and 1873, sets the baseline before newer machines. Air driven through a vibrating reed makes a low tone that carries 3 to 8 kilometers in calm. The action each 2 hours is feeling the packing glands and checking the air chest. The risk is loosened packing from vibration after a long watch. The outcome is a pressure leak that steals the note by degrees. The consequence is a soft horn that ships miss above wave noise when seas run to 1 meter in Cape Cod Bay. Water loads the signal as much as fuel. A Cape Station cistern holds 3,500 to 5,600 gallons, roughly 13 to 21,000 liters, and the injector can draw 100 to 300 liters per hour in a long run. The action is to open the feed just enough to keep steam steady while the note repeats. The risk is a falling head that pulls a gulp of air and makes the injector chatter. The outcome is a ragged tone. The consequence is faster drawdown and a hard choice between whistle and household use until rain refills the vault. Coal decides tone during a blank horizon in June or January. A scuttle runs near 10 kilograms, and a watch may burn 3 to 5 scuttles each hour when a strong breeze pushes the stack. The action is to keep the fire bright without clinkers for 6 hours straight. The risk is ash choking the grate near the 4th hour. The outcome is a falling pressure that shortens the 6-second note by 1 or 2 seconds. The consequence is heavier shoveling, a shake on the grates each 2 hours, and a thinner fuel margin for the next fog day. Manana Island off Monhegan shows the limits in practice. In 1907, the keeper ran continuous signals for 8 hours while sea smoke held under 100 meters and air sat near -5 Celsius. The action became a loop of firing, draining, and counting 90 seconds by pocket watch. The risk was ice in a low point of pipe that struck the valve at the next cycle. The outcome was a cracked seat and silence for 20 minutes. The consequence was coal use rising by 1/5 after the repair and a week of rationing until the next supply boat. After the 1903 patent, the diaphone replaces older horns at key stations, bringing a 2-tone signature and a larger appetite for air. The action is to start a compressor, keep lubricators fed, and hold pressure in a narrow band while the element beats. The risk is overnight condensation that pools and then slugs a valve when temperature falls from 10 to 4 Celsius. The outcome is a dead minute and a harsh restart. The consequence is 10 minutes of draining, 2 to 3 turns on petcocks, and a note that returns rougher until lines warm again. Attention is the last consumable. The tables still ask for 6 seconds through 90 seconds for as long as fog lasts, and the lamp upstairs keeps its 4-hour wind. The action at Monomoy or Pollock Rip is to count cycles while trimming a wick between blasts. The risk is a miscount after 6 hours that shifts the pattern by 1 interval. The outcome is a signature that could be read as another station at 8 miles, about 13 kilometers. The consequence is a corrected log, a lost minute, and a keeper who climbs slower to the lens for the next check. Winter weather on Cape Cod turns routine into conflict between tasks and cold. Air near 0 Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit, coats iron and glass when spray rides a 15 meter per second wind. The action is reading the barometer and lashing the lantern door before dusk. The risk is super cool drizzle that freezes hinges in under 10 minutes. The outcome is a stuck latch when the lamp needs a trim. The consequence is a 15-minute delay that dims the beam and pushes work into the next watch. The Portland gale of 26 and 27, November 1898, set the hard edge of that risk. Pressure fell toward 950 hectopascals, and gusts reached hurricane force along the outer arm. The action at Race Point was clearing ice from galleries and shutters every 30 to 60 minutes while snow packed on rails. The risk was ice accretion of 1 to 2 centimeters per hour. The outcome was a frozen door that trapped a keeper for 20 minutes. The consequence was a late lamp trim while the SS Portland failed offshore. Wind loading grows fast with speed and height. At 20 to 30 meters above the beach, force on frames rises with the square of wind. The action is stepping onto an icy gallery to chip a path for 5 minutes when wind jumps from 15 to 20 meters per second. The risk is a slip with a scraper and a 10-meter fall. The outcome is a retreat after 2 steps and a decision to wait for a lull. The consequence is more frost on a copper vent that bends in 2 hours and cuts draft. Windows to act arrive between squalls and close quickly. Lulls last 15 to 60 minutes when bands pass, and a careful keeper stacks chores to fit each opening. The action is freeing a ventilator, shoveling a drift, and knocking glaze from a bell hammer before the next burst. The risk is overexertion at -8 Celsius with wind chill near -15. The outcome is numb fingers during a burner check and a wick set a millimeter low. The consequence is a weak flame that carries into nightfall. Cold complicates the fog plant as much as hands. Feed water near 2 Celsius slugs injectors and chills gauge glasses. The action is blowing down a glass for 30 seconds and cracking a petcock to drain a low spot. The risk is thermal shock that cracks the tube under hot steam. The outcome is a leak that drains 2 liters in 10 minutes. The consequence is a shutdown to fit a spare, a missed 6-second blast in the next 90-second cycle, and a log entry that must explain the gap. Snow changes the stair math and the time outside. Wet iron treads demand smaller loads, so a 10-kilogram coal scuttle replaces a 20-kilogram sack. The action is doubling trips from 3 to 6 in 1 hour to feed a boiler under onshore wind. The risk is longer exposure on a gallery at 20 meters height with gusts above 12 meters per second. The outcome is deeper chill and slower hands on the lens latch. The consequence is a delayed clean that leaves a faint film for the next night. Damage lingers after wind falls below 10 meters per second. 3 days after a heavy blow, glazing and putty still fight the cold at 0 Celsius. The action is replacing 1 broken pane out of 12 and resetting a bent ventilator. The risk is a poor seal that breathes on each gust. The outcome is a flicker that lowers effective range by 1 to 2 miles until a warm spell allows a true cure. The consequence is a week of conservative watch, which steals rest and carries stress into the next storm cycle. Living quarters decide endurance long before a storm reaches the lantern. A Cape dwelling kept a rain-fed cistern between 3,500 and 21,800 gallons, roughly 13 to 82,000 litres, shared across keepers and family. The action each morning was dipping a mark stick and allocating 10 to 15 litres per person, plus cleaning water for brass and glass. The risk came after 20 rainless days in July when the mark fell 5 centimetres. The outcome was rationing that cut washing and lens work. The consequence was slower hygiene and a film that returned the next night. Heat and cooking set another clock. A cast iron stove burned 2 to 4 kilograms of coal per hour when air sat near -2 Celsius, or a stack of cordwood when coal ran short. The action was feeding the fire, clearing ash, and brushing the stovepipe each 7 days. The risk was a loose joint after 20 days of vibration that leaked soot into bedding. The outcome was a cough that disturbed sleep and reduced night focus. The consequence was 90 minutes lost to a chimney clean, while the lens upstairs still demanded polish. Illness turned distance into risk. A typical kit held carbolic acid, bandages, a mercury thermometer, laudanum for pain, and a wooden splint. The action after a fall on step 50 was boiling 1 litre of water, washing a cut, and binding tight. The risk was infection when surf held above 1 1/2 meters and the boat could not launch for 3 days. The outcome by night 2 was fever and a shaky hand on the wick. The consequence was a shortened watch rotation that pushed the assistant past 12 hours and raised error odds. Food logistics governed warmth and mood over 30 to 60 days without shore leave. A ledger tracked flour by the 100-pound sack, about 45 kilograms, beans by the peck, and salt pork by the barrel. The action each week was airing sacks and checking for weevils after day 30. The risk was losing 1 25-kilogram sack to spoilage in damp fog. The outcome was thinner porridge and lower calories during a 14-hour winter night. The consequence was slower climbs with 2 5-gallon cans and a later trim that stole brightness before dawn. Sanitation reduced to buckets, a privy, and careful footing. Grey water ran 20 litres every other day to a soak pit behind the house, which froze at -5 Celsius and turned planks slick. The action was hauling and spreading ashes for traction before sunrise. The risk was a slip with a bruise that lingered 3 days. The outcome was a compromise upstairs, wiping alternate prisms rather than all 12 panes in one session. The consequence was measurable scatter until legs steadied, which cut the effective range by a mile in damp air. Family presence shifted the water math. A spouse and child added 10 to 20 litres daily, and laundry on the 7th day could pull another 40. The action was splitting the ledger, household first, then boiler, then lens cleaning. The risk during a 12-hour August fog was choosing the whistle over washing. The outcome was salt on bedding and chafed skin that disturbed the next watch. The consequence was a candid log entry using the word necessity, which a district office often questioned when supply finally came. Isolation amplified every small error into a schedule change. Records from outer Cape stations show stretches of 30 to 60 continuous days on station in midwinter, with launches cancelled by 2-meter seas and 9-second sets. The action on day 31 was counting candles, weighing coal, and measuring the cistern again. The risk was a cold snap that froze the privy door and stiffened hands at 0 Celsius. The outcome was slow dressing for a midnight wind and a late lens wipe. The consequence pushed need toward the next link, communication and rescue, where delay cost more than comfort. Before radio, signals moved by sight and sound that weather often hid. A keeper raised international code flags by day and fired a red Coston flare by night, each burn lasting about 1 minute above the beach. The bell gave one heavy strike every 15 to 30 seconds when fog settled under 200 meters. The action was to climb, hoist, and strike in sequence. The risk was wind at 15 meters per second that bent smoke and muted metal. The outcome was mist, meaning beyond 1 kilometer. The consequence was delay measured in tens of minutes before help started. On 23 August 1899, Lightship No. 70 sent the first United States ship-to-shore radiotelegraph message near San Francisco. The board noted the trial and pushed experiments east. The action at a Cape station the next spring was reading an order to test a spark transmitter across a few kilometers. The risk was static at sunset that swamped dots and dashes. The outcome was partial copy at 6 to 8 words per minute. The consequence was a plan to add wireless, where fog and traffic overlapped, even if skill and upkeep grew the task list. The practical jump came on 12 August 1901, when the Nantucket Lightship signaled the Sconset station on Nantucket Island. The action during an 8-hour fog was holding a key for 6 to 8 hours while reporting ship names and bearings. The risk was operator fatigue that slowed code by 1 word per minute each hour. The outcome was still faster traffic reports than any launch could carry. The consequence was a new duty cycle that expected continuous watch, which pulled attention from lens winds and whistle checks on the same night. Storms still turned minutes into hours. Salt spray on insulators and snow on guys pulled range down from 20 kilometers to 5 when wind rose past 15 meters per second. The action during a nor'easter was drying porcelain with alcohol and sheltering the coil box. The risk was a ground leak that cut current and smeared the spark. The outcome was no answer for 40 minutes while breakers hammered the bar. The consequence was a fallback to bell and flare that cost men and time that the sea did not return in January dark. Rescue worked when lines reached in both directions. The United States Life-Saving Service hauled a surf boat or fired a Lyle gun to throw a light shot line 200 to 300 meters, then rove a heavier hawser for a breeches buoy. The action in sleet was hauling one person every 4 to 6 minutes once the whip ran true. The risk was a parting line after a gust at 20 meters per second. The outcome was a reset that burned 20 more minutes. The consequence was colder men aloft and fewer total survivors before tide turned. Coordination lived in small distances that hurt. A keeper ran 200 meters of sand to the boathouse, helped drag a surf boat to a launch point, and timed the set at 9 seconds. The risk was a third wave break that filled the boat in 5 seconds. The outcome was a retreat and a second try after 30 minutes. The consequence was a missed window when a schooner drifted another quarter mile, about 400 meters, past a point where the breeches buoy could have reached from shore. Attention split across devices and clocks set final limits. A 90-second fog cycle met a 4-hour lens wind, while radio asked for steady hand and dry gear. The action in thick weather was choosing which to touch first when 2 tasks struck at once. The risk was picking radio while the lens stalled or winding while the call sign faded. The outcome was 2 minutes lost. The consequence was a ship at 6 knots, about 11 kilometers per hour, drifting 360 meters before correction, which turned an assist into a search on the next tide. Rules fixed the tempo before wind or fog appeared. The United States Lighthouse Board issued detailed instructions in 1871 and again in 1881, then standardized forms in 1902. The action each hour was to enter weather, burn time, and wick height. The risk was a blank line at 2 in the morning when fatigue won. The outcome was a noted defect. The consequence was a reprimand or a fine equal to 1 or 2 days of pay under the rulebook. Inspections enforced those lines with calendars and boots. District officers made 2 surprise visits per year, often in May and October, and checked lantern glass, brass rails, bedding, and books. The action before dawn was polishing 12 panes and laying fresh cotton waste. The risk was a single smudge or a misfiled log sheet. The outcome was a demerit written in red. The consequence was pay held back for 1 to 3 days and a warning kept on file for the next round. Pay looked solid on paper, but thin in practice. A keeper earned $700 to $1,000 per year, or about $58 to $83 per month. A town factory hand in 1905 averaged $11.16 per week, roughly $48 per month, but could take overtime. The action was buying flour at $3 per 100 pounds and coal at $5 per ton. The risk was a storm month with 2 missed launches. The outcome was a cash hole. The consequence was delaying boot repair and stretching meals for 10 days. Fuel policy tracked both budgets and safety. By 1889, depot kerosene priced near 8.5 cents per gallon, while older lard oil cost about 57 cents. The action at a Cape tower burning 2 to 4 gallons per long winter night was ordering 60 to 100 gallons per month. The risk was rust scale from a 40 to 50 gallon drum that clogged a tube. The outcome was a teardown that took 40 minutes. The consequence was a dim hour and a written note to the depot for cleaner stock. Paper changed hands with structure in 1910. The service shifted from the board to the lighthouse service that year, and station numbers, forms, and paint marks followed. The action was rewriting inventories and routing small repairs through a new approval step. The risk was confusion over a hinge or latch under $20. The outcome was a 2-week delay for parts during April wind. The consequence was a lantern door that stuck at 20 meters height until the next calm day allowed a safe fix. Supply cadence set the size of errors. Launches aimed for 1 trip every 14 to 30 days, weather permitting. The action at Wood End in 1904 was ordering wicks and 2 chimneys valued at $4. The risk was a 10-day blow that stopped the boat. The outcome was 2 nights on hand-cut wicks and a chipped spare. The consequence was extra soot, 3 hours of cleaning, and a thinner margin when fog joined the next week, and the whistle also needed coal. Discipline linked the ledger to the light. Sunday checks counted wicks by the dozen, chimneys by the pair, and kerosene by the dipstick inch, about 2 liters. The action was signing for a drum and returning empties with seals intact. The risk was a short wait or a leaky bung that lost a liter per day. The outcome was a report to the office and tighter rationing until the next scheduled launch. The consequence was a real cut in brightness on the 12th hour, which pushed the next chapter's problem onto distance and transport. Transport fails first because the sea decides the schedule on Cape Cod. A keeper's world stretches 2 to 5 kilometers from the town wharf to Long Point, Wood End, or Race Point, short on a map but long in a surf line. The action is launching a yawl at slack tide with a 9-second set and a 1.5 meter swell. The risk is a 3rd breaker that turns the bow. The outcome is a wet boat and 1 bag lost. The consequence is a return to the pier and a second try 30 minutes later as wind rises. Bulk rides low and awkward. Coal comes in 25 to 50 kilogram sacks, 55 to 110 pounds, and lamp oil in 40 to 50 gallon drums that weigh near 180 kilograms when full. The action is sliding a drum across a plank from skiff to beach and rolling it above a rack line. The risk is a cracked bung that drips a liter in an hour. The outcome is a short margin when night runs long. The consequence is tighter rationing at the lamp and a slower whistle on the next fog day. Cut-offs are simple and hard to meet. A coxswain turns back when white water sheets across the bar or wind holds above 15 meters per second for an hour. The action under that limit is 2 trips with 3 men and 200 kilograms of cargo. The risk is a loaded stern that buries in a following sea. The outcome is a soaked coal sack that clinks to clinker by night. The consequence is extra firing to reach pressure, which steals time from the lens wind and pushes fatigue into the watch. A missed changeover shows how minutes become days. Late October brings fog 2 hours early while wind climbs from 8 to 15 meters per second before noon. The action is a relief keeper halfway to Long Point when visibility drops under 200 meters. The risk is losing the spit's edge and sweeping past the mark at 3 kilometers per hour. The outcome is a turn back and a harbour wait. The consequence is the resident keeper working past 60 hours and small errors at the wick on the third night. When seas hold near 2 meters, wagons replace boats along the backshore. The route from Provincetown to Race Point runs 6 to 8 kilometers on soft sand at 3 to 4 kilometers per hour. The action is loading 50-kilogram sacks on a beach cart behind a tired horse and beating the tide by 1 hour. The risk is a cut bank at a stream mouth and a wheel sunk to the hub. The outcome is an hour of digging in windblown sand. The consequence is a late arrival and a rushed hoist at dusk. Landing is only half the load. The action at the tower is rigging a block and tackle rated for 200 kilograms to lift crates of chimneys and wick boxes to a window 10 meters above grade. The risk is a salt-stiff hemp fall line that parts after 6 months. The outcome is glass worth $10 broken on the landing. The consequence is a month on 2 spares while a mail order crawls through weather, which raises anxiety each time a gust shakes the lantern. Cadence ties everything together. Launchers aim for 1 trip every 14 to 30 days, but a week of 2-meter seas stretches the gap to 21 or more. The action on day 18 is counting wicks, dipping the kerosene drum by 2 liters per inch and weighing coal by the scuttle. The risk is a second delay that cuts flour and fuel at once. The outcome is dimmer light at the 12th hour and a softer horn after midnight. The consequence loops back to endurance, where transport scarcity forces risk into every other system. The sum is simple. Systems run on clocks that do not align. A 6-second blast every 90 seconds when fog sits under 200 meters, a lens wind every 4 hours, lamp trims at midnight and near 4 in the morning, cistern checks at dawn, and boat days that slip from 14 to 21. What breaks first is attention when 2 or 3 cycles coincide. A keeper trades 1 minute at the clockwork for 1 minute at the whistle and loses both. Over 12 to 48 hours, small penalties add up. A scratched prism from 1 rushed wipe costs a mile of range. A soot film after 1 flare costs another mile. A short waterhead after 1 long fog takes a day to refill from a 3,500 to 5,600 gallon vault. Cost and rules shaped choices but did not change the physics. Kerosene at 8.5 cents per gallon replaced lard oil at 57 cents by 1889. The board's instructions of 1871 and 1881 fixed routines. The lens still stood 2.54 meters tall and weighed about 1.5 tons. The weight still needed winding every 4 hours while the sea ran its own time. 2 lessons hold from 1880 to 1915 on Cape Cod. First, technology shifted delays but expanded duty. Wireless in 1899 at Lightship No. 70 and the Nantucket to Sconset link in 1901 cut message time from hours to minutes. The diaphone after 1903 pushed sound farther, yet both demanded dry insulators, steady code, warm oil, and precise pressure. Second, some limits stay outside control. The Portland gale of 26 and 27, November 1898, closed every window at once. The shift in 1910 to the lighthouse service changed paint and forms, not waves or icing. A cistern at Race Point held 5,600 gallons, and a rulebook set the page count, but surf at 1.5 to 2 meters and fog that lasts 12 hours still decide the order of work. That is why a day feels short and the work does not fit, and why a keeper lasts by pacing failure rather than by defeating it.